Hello, I am Jesse Warnke with Charles Aris Executive Search. I am one of our practice leaders here. I am focused on the industrial sector, specifically on general managers, operations, engineering, and supply chain leadership roles. I am joined today by Brandon Snyder. Brandon is a highly successful business leader and supply chain leader. Brandon brings a long track record of roles with Honeywell, Plug Power, Tesla. In fact, it's about 20 years of experience, if I'm not mistaken, Brandon. Brandon's got a long history, again, of scaling global supply chains, rapid growth, significant cost reductions, and frankly, I think probably one of the most important aspects of all that is actually building the world-class teams that have enabled those successes. So Brandon's really a go-to expert in those cutting-edge industries that move relatively fast. So welcome, Brandon.
Thanks, Jesse. Glad to be here.
Today, we're going to actually spend some time discussing strategic partnerships. And what do you say we get right into it, Brandon?
Do it.
Why don't we just really quick define what is a strategic partnership? I think it's kind of obvious, but it's always nice to say, what is it? What does it mean to you? And then we'll kind of jump into a little bit of the questions.
Yeah, I'm really happy to talk about this. I hope it's helpful to your audience. I'm very passionate about significant partnerships and specifically supply chain partnerships. There's a ton of value that I think companies can extract whenever you have an excellent partnership setup. It's definitely it's an evolution above a transactional relationship, a long-term agreement, and then you get into those really big partnerships where you have two parties that are trying to accomplish something they can't do on their own. They both receive something out of it that's not just a financial benefit, but there's some other sort of technical or functional excellence that they bring to the table. And that's really exciting because that's where you get the game-changing, industry-changing, next-level type things.
Oh, cool. Good. All right. Well, so right on the heels of that, when you really think about that partnership, how do you identify and select the right strategic partners to align with the goals of the organization that you work with?
Yeah. It's a tricky question. We've got, I think it kind of starts with the why and the what. Different companies are trying to solve a different set of problems. It sometimes looks a little like the problems you would solve with an M&A type strategy. Is it very much what you can solve with a strategic partnership of sort of an adequate size? Sometimes, and the ones I've been a part of have been anything from getting access to products, market access, IP and technology, development resources, investment and scaling, or even sometimes just market positioning, which is kind of an interesting one. But selecting the right partner comes down to the folks that you can work with that are going to best help you solve those problems together. You got to have sort of a shared focus. And secondly is there's a cultural and definitely sort of a trust fit that comes into play as well when selecting those partners that I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah. Is there, when you kind of think about maybe historical areas where you've considered partnerships, are there any maybe red flags or non-negotiables that you immediately say this is something that's not going to work and you shy away from?
Yeah, I think one of the things that one of the things that I've seen that is an immediate red flag is when you've got a partner. You've built a relationship. You've obviously structured a very detailed contract that sets the rules of engagement for all the functions to work together, and that contract becomes almost overly focused on by your partner. I have seen where some folks will lose that innovation and the problem solving when you immediately go to the contract. So for me, that's a major red flag in who we should do business with, who we're going to deal with, and whenever you see something like that.
Yeah, interesting. So there's still that human element, the personal relationship that needs to be part of that business engagement.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. You've got to be able to trust. We really move at the speed of trust. And it's, you've got to have a partner that obviously shares values and has the right goal alignment and you can trust.
Yeah. So on the topic of trust, how do you build that trust and collaboration in those high stake partnerships? And again, these aren't typically small business relationships, right? There's millions, hundreds of millions, potentially billions of dollars at stake, especially in cutting edge industries. Again, Tesla, Plug Power, electric vehicles, and green energy. How do you do that?
You're right. Definitely, there's a range, but there's been several that have been a part of that are in that $1 billion range. The building trust with or finding the right partner is and building trust with that partner is sort of an evolution. It's an iterative thing. Particularly if you have a new partner, it's a transactional relationship, and then maybe sort of more of then you would sort of mature into that long-term agreement. This is sort of like a dating before marriage. I mean, these are really big, very impactful, market-facing sometimes interactions that are a little bit more high stakes. So there's definitely sort of a try before you buy in building that trust and building that experience. And you really can't know how the other party is going to react. Very much like a relationship, same thing in business. Whenever you have that business has got to be stressed before you'll see how that business is going to react. What's really under the hood and how are decisions really being made. You have to stress that relationship to see who you're working with, and you kind of want to have that experience before you go into that large scale partnership, or even like a plant type environment is a good model to think about when you think about really getting in close and trying to reap new benefits with a product or a service based supplier.
That makes a lot of sense. When you think about the date before marriage analogy is a really good one. What are some of those initial, let's call them the dates, or those smaller scale transactional type of activities that you could say are maybe a good way of vetting a potential long-term relationship?
It's interesting. It's a good question. I think there's probably two categories I think about is, if you've got major issues within your market segment or your industry or your business, and you don't have a partner to help you with that, then you've either not reached out to the right partners, or you're not engaging your existing partners at the right level or capturing the right mind share. You've got the whole benefit of that strategic marketing is it's a lever that I think a lot of businesses don't think about. They do conventional business, whereas this is really what is going to, bring out that sort of game-changing results. So whenever you've got these types of problems, depending on your experience level with that supplier is going to dictate how fast you can move to solve the problem, whether it's starting that new transactional relationship anew, or, and there's certainly ways to accelerate that. But I really think it involves, if you want to move quickly with something like this, you have to be engaging a partner at all levels. There's the people you're working with, there's their leadership, and it's not been uncommon to sit down with the board of multi-billion-dollar companies and sit down and actually discuss the value proposition and try to get that level of engagement. That's the level of connectivity that it takes to get the buy-in at all levels.
You touched on something. You mentioned quick. I was thinking the date before marriage and you want small transactions, and the idea is you get a sense and you want to pressure test, which I love because, again, a $1 billion relationship is a big deal. And if you're there and it doesn't work, that's a terrible spot to be in, difficult to untangle as well. But in the tech market, especially highly innovative and fast accelerating ones, I think of Tesla. Plug Power is probably very similar. The ability to date and have a long dating relationship or a long courting relationship might not actually be possible. In reality, you might have to move at the speed of light. So is there a way to even do a love at first sight element to get to that long, big strategic partnership of $1 billion deal in the shortest possible time? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
There's a decent amount of risk with these things. I mean, I've seen them move somewhat quickly, but I'll talk about a couple of areas to check for risk in a second. Maybe I'm just not a big enough romantic, Jesse, to believe in the love at first sight. But I do believe that there's functionally speaking, when you look at sourcing, supply chain, and these types of supplier management functions, there's a speed at which people need to move, and a level of sense of urgency that you'll see in operations teams that I love to see at the at this functional level, the same level of rigor and intensity that I'm sure many of us have seen at really great world-class operations. I like to see that same approach used at a functional level. But in terms of trying to move quickly, it requires a lot of communication at a lot of levels, very intense, very, very intense. In terms of love at first sight,
not too risk averse.
The risk aversion. Yeah, thank you.
Too dangerous. Okay.
In terms of sussing out the risk, you've got a risk approach that you've got to you've got to qualify your supplier for this type of behavior, and that's usually what all of us are thinking on day one, is finding the right partner. What you find out in this industry or in this function is you'll have your company's own assessment of your capabilities, of your business plan, of your strategy, of your resolve. All of those things, you can get a little bit of an echo chamber in some companies. So you don't just have to assess risk with your external partner. You also need to very quickly assess the talent and the capabilities internally, and having an open-eyed view on what you're really bringing to the table in terms of risk. So that's where the two areas of risk come in terms of trying to manage that speed you can move at.
Yeah.
You got to be able to manage, really kick the tires on both quickly.
Got it. When you think about, obviously, with risk, the flip side of risk is you're always thinking about the value for that risk and what you're entering into. When you think about strategic partnerships, how could a partnership deliver significant value without requiring let's say, a full acquisition?
No, you're that's a really good one. That's spot on. I think a lot of companies, if you think about it, a lot of companies want to solve and understand, just move quickly and solve big problems. You need M&A is top of mind. There's a lot of companies will have a dedicated M&A team that is looking at the next M&A JV type situation, and they will look at a lot of things, but those those dedicated M&A teams sometimes could be a little bit more like hammers looking for nails, and I think that people will overlook what a world-class sourcing and supply chain team can bring. If you can extract a lot of the value, and I've found numerous times where we can extract most of the value of an M&A activity with thinking different and doing different within that partnership development and that building out the whole suite of contracts. And a lot of times you'll find with a really successful partnership, in those conversations, we're talking about how this could potentially feed into a potential M&A. Every really good partnership, you're almost thinking about, if this works, is there going to be an M&A or a JV type activity? And it's a lower risk alternative. It's a much cheaper option in a lot of cases. But there's a mix. So you're still managing some IP things and some other things, but which it's just, I think a lot of people skip that step. There's not usually dedicated strategic partnership focuses by supply chain organizations.
Do you have an example? And the answer might be no for proprietary reasons or confidentiality, but do you have any particular ones that scream out from your history where it wasn't an acquisition, but it almost felt like an acquisition just due to the synergies that were created from the relationship?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think, it gets, think about it, the easiest way to point at one of those is you think about the plant type environments. That's the physical manifestation of a very close partnership a lot of times. So you'll see the people that you work with on a regular basis, but the badge is maybe a little bit different because, they're a different company. There's probably some firewalls on where they can go and you can go, but largely those are really, really close environments. You'll see them in the break room, and sometimes those conversations feel a little bit operational in nature of, you suddenly become the escalation for, what type of snacks we have in the break room, or the parking lot that needs work and things, because that will ultimately go through, because you're managing a partner that has maybe shared overhead. And, a lot of benefits come with that too, in terms of reduced transportation and innovation and things. But yeah, there's a lot of cases where you get very close, and then there's other ones too on a more engineering basis and technology basis where it's careful. You got to be careful to distinguish. You're working on so many projects that are developmental in nature, and it's a very collaborative environment. And it takes educating your engineering team and your operations team on how to work together, because it gets so close.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And obviously I asked that question having a similar overlap and a similar background. So one of the things that kind of rolls around my head is when you think about the challenges that you faced when creating or maintaining strategic partnerships, supply chain disruptions. Everybody's had it. The most recent one, I think, is COVID. Well, I shouldn't even say the most recent. Actually, now it's no longer recent. It's about 4 years ago as COVID. But right now we've got global trade unrest. Right, we've got the tariffs rebalancing that's happening. Maybe take a minute and just kind of talk through how do you deal with those challenges when you have the strategic partnerships.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you learn a lot about your partners in these types of environments. That when you really stress the system, you learn who there's. I think for a good partner, you learn things like, for us, force majeure is a bad word. We're going to work together to the last minute. In fact, it's almost a standoff to see who's going to tap out first. There's a really good positive challenge that you get either between the operations team or the technical team or the leadership about we're going to fight through this and work together. Also having partners that can accept help, because we all went through labor issues, we all went through transportation issues, we all went through storage problems and everything else. So having these types of close collaborative environments and these close partnerships has really set us above our competitors, in that we're able to accomplish and solve these problems. But I think good partners, they definitely don't knee jerk and don't go to a force majeure. And there's a lot more communication that's required. When everything's changing, you're communicating at all levels of the company, because everybody's, there's so much change within their company. You've got to stay totally plugged into that. Mm-hmm. and make sure that you're responding correctly and in kind on your side. So the communication is super key. And then I think the last thing is there's probably some areas where I've seen where people didn't do well. You see areas where other people, at the sight of some difficulty, they maybe have tapped out quickly, and those are different types of conversations. And so but I think it's our job from the as a function, is managing, the good ones and the bad ones in those types of environments. There's some really interesting scenarios that have come up in the last 5 years, 10 years for sure.
Yeah, I think some of the behaviors I think that stood out the most, that represented the character of obviously the leaders, but the character of the organizations, were the extension of the supply chains to say, hey, we have a large team, a global reach, and we're willing to help you find additional suppliers for your component shortages. I've seen that in the past, and it was hey, we greatly appreciate it. Here's what we're looking for. And the idea was that, again, we had significant reach, but our clients had significantly greater spend. And so their ability to influence the market was greater, and it helped us support them.
So 100%. So like if you think about, I'm sure you've seen some of these suppliers. Maybe they have a big event, they have any of the things we've mentioned, or even they just have a fire at the operation. They have to be willing to accept the help. You have to build that trust in advance, because before you have your home team crawling all through their operation to help them solve problems and mitigating a disastrous situation, or sending in resources from one of your plants that's closest by, they have to trust you. And then it's really, again, this is a big, I think for me, I think a big interest is making sure that the sourcing and supplier management teams are on site as well, with the same level of aggression as everyone else to solve the problem. It feels very much like in these types of critical scenarios, it's like speed dating meets rapid problem solving negotiations, trying to solve all these issues to get the right technical resources and the right to proceed, and checking all the boxes quickly in these types of scenarios.
Yeah. I think we're kind of touching on it already, but one of the things you think about is measuring success, right? And I think it's very easy to say, well, success in supply chain is a balance sheet. If you see the balance sheet move in a positive direction, then clearly the supply chain team has done their job. But I think we would both agree that it moves beyond the balance sheet. How do you, obviously you've been in many, many progressive roles in supply chain leadership in a variety of industries. How do you measure success?
Very very goal oriented, and so not. I think there's times where we win, and we win across the board, and then there's times where we fail, but we still learn something. So there's never a case where we're not moving forward to some degree. I think the benefits that you see have to be financial. We have to get the shared outcome that both companies are looking for. We have to succeed there. Some of the secondary benefits and the softer benefits you see in the culture. There's a lot of cross-pollination you see with highly intertwined partnerships. You get a good cross-pollination of some of the cultures. Maybe that risk aversion versus moving fast. You see those things collide. Also, I think one of the good things is when you have an organization that has a little bit of an outward focus at the functional levels, they're aware of their peers at all levels. It can be a really favorable challenge, peer pressure, I guess you could say, for your operations team. For whenever they know the next best alternative costs, and how dare they beat us at this, or your engineering team, in terms of continuing to up the game on performance and develop and time to market. So, just like having those types of connections, this function is a really good way to stay plugged in with what your customers' feedback is. A lot of companies look at that, but there's also, you learn a lot from your supply base as well, and your partners. They're going to teach you a lot of things where you've got blind spots, where you've got market intel. So that's a huge value that comes to the table when you get this section right of your business.
For more of the Charles Aris podcast and access to additional resources like compensation reports, blog articles, and newsletters, visit our resource hub at www.charlesaris.com/resource.
I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. When you think about, obviously we talked about the financials, you talk about culture. I think culture is a little difficult to measure other than maybe like a retention or something like that. And the financials are an easy measurement. You can see the balance sheet move again. When you go into an organization, when you think of maybe the top 3 or 4 KPIs that you generally look for, or you try to bring in immediately, are there maybe 3 or 4 that are your kind of go-tos in the supply chain world?
Yeah, it is a tough question. I think there's, to your point, I think a lot of them are going to be known, but it depends back to that why, the why and the what of, what we're trying to solve. Give you an example is I've had certain partners that really weren't necessarily interested in they weren't focused so much on the financial outcome of that partnership. It was more about developing a right to promote and sort of rebranding an established commodity company into somebody that's more of a tech-oriented company with a different multiplier on their stock. So that is a very different thing to sell to a partner, but it has a value. So it's difficult to put a one-size KPI on these things because it's so different in what we're selling and what we're bringing to the table and what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. When you talked about, I talked a little bit about culture within the group and not being immeasurable. But if you kind of think about culture from a strategic partnership, different countries, different companies, cultural alignment, how does it play into a successful partnership?
I think it's huge, right? So, I mean, it's part of that trust. Different partners have different levels of, I don't know, connectedness within their own business. There's things to watch out for on that, which we can talk about later. But the cultural benefits. Let me talk about the one. When we talk about bringing mass market EVs into market, you need a bunch of people that we were actually labeled as cowboys by our partner, and they were maybe more of an Asian or Japanese focused, quality focused company. And there's certain areas where you need the cowboys, but there's other areas where you need that eye for quality when you're talking about maybe high energy novel cell production that has massive safety and quality implications. So those cultures are really needed to win, and they've got to be in different areas. But I think it's good because over the years you start to see that cross pollination of, maybe the U.S. version of this Asian supplier became the cowboys of, the cell world within a, multi-billion-dollar global company. So you see that cross pollination, and both ways. And so it's really critical. And those are some of the values that I think you can get where there's just no way to have been successful with a, move fast and break things mentality across the board with a product like, a transportation product or a vehicle. It's just,
Do you think that's an example where, and frankly, with that organization, there's so many Herculean efforts and so many things that came together to make it a success story that it is. Do you think there's organizations where you need to be maybe more discerning about a cultural misalignment and being maybe where you have such a differentiation that you would say this is actually going to cause our organization not to function properly?
Yeah, I think they kind of stem around the same watch outs would be, organizations or partners with high turnover, or where they're not bought in at all levels, or they don't, or we didn't do the base work of what we're trying to achieve wasn't well defined. Those are really those are all things to watch out for, and that comes back to that starting conversation. Things are going to change. Most of these agreements we have are hundreds of pages because you have to think through everything. It's like writing a prenuptial agreement before you get married. You have to think of every terrible thing that could happen where you're like, why are we even doing this? Because you have to have an exit plan. You have to think about every eventuality. You have to be bought in at all levels of the company because things are going to change, and you have to have a culture that can adapt to that. And, I'll give you another example of bringing novel products to market. I believe in one evening, we made fundamental changes, 14 different fundamental changes to key components of our products. Massive implications of that. 14 changes. And this is more of a plant type model. There's really no way to bring new and novel products to market. If you think about having maybe a supplier that's on the other side of the country, even with air freight, that would have taken a month to solve. You couldn't have done it overnight. And there's dozens or hundreds of examples like that you can see where this is the way that you can really have a game-changing impact in a market or doing something totally different. So you have to have suppliers that are really engaged, you've communicated with, you've done all the homework, because those are the types of changes that are going to come up and hit you. And those are the watch outs.
Talking about partnerships, Brandon, and thinking about culture, when you think about entering into a relationship, do you think it's a good idea to maybe expose your own organization at the level of transparency, right? And I say this in the sense of, you want to know everything about your strategic partner. You want to know how they run, how they function. You talked about, do they have a lot of turnover, all the operating things. But in the same token, do you think it's important that they know, let's say, everything about your organization so that they understand the buyer beware, what they're getting in bed with as well, so that you mitigate their surprises and their potential tensions that they might have 2 years into the relationship with your organization?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's a worry that do you disclose too much? Do you expose yourself, from an IP perspective, a technology perspective, a trade secrets type perspective? Those all things come into play. Let's talk about that. The other one is if somebody has your name gets associated with that other partner, and if they're putting out PRs that can cause significant ripple effects for you. I mean, there's a lot of exposure by getting too close. So I think there's a few things. I think there's a few things to try to unpack on that. Obviously, if we talk about just starting with the IP piece, I mean, obviously we've got the conventional types of things you've got with your patents and things of that nature, and your trade secrets. We typically would keep a lot of protocols around firewalls, both within the organization. A lot of training is required with that. Sometimes physical firewalls to keep separation. A lot of times from a contractual perspective, we'll have to have clean teams. We'll separate a specific clean team to do independent development so that we don't get into this, foreground IP and things of that nature. So there's a lot of different mechanisms that come in there. The other thing is it really comes down to there's doing the right thing. If you've got the right partner and you've got a mutual benefit, having a strong supply connection oftentimes is enough that you'll get that call when, hey, I'm going to put out a PR of some kind. I don't want to damage this relationship. It's too critical to our business. And you'll have that sort of mutual respect from your partner. That's actually even more motivating than I think a lot of the other things I mentioned earlier in terms of having partners do the right thing. And then the last thing, of course, you have to have is it comes down to the last resort is your strong contract. You've got to go through that, like I mentioned earlier, that sort of prenuptial set of scenarios where every possible outcome you've, to the best of your ability, tried to capture and document. So,
got it. Okay. When you think about past partnerships that haven't met expectations, what have you learned where those have maybe shaped future deals that you have entered into?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think going into these types of things, you know what you know, and there's a lot of information you're not going to have. I think in examples I can think of, the information that you may not have, you always think comes from that outside source. And you're always thinking about what you don't know about them and what are they working on. But again, there's also the case of the internal. How well do you know your own internal company's capability and ability to achieve the business plan and bring to the table RP? So you gotta be careful about those echo chambers, and watching out for those. I think the other thing to learn about is what are good things about the contract. You'll never know because they're not a problem. But there's a host of all the things that you find out that you're missing within a contract that is just something that you're going to learn from in some cases. So I think you learn more from those areas of contract gaps than anything. But again, it's really important to always do business with people that you can trust, that have the same come at things from the right. The spirit of the agreement is always where you start. It's always king. In those types of scenarios. So
okay. Last question I have for you is when you think about trends and kind of in the future, where do you see the future of strategic partnerships going? Let's call it 5, 10, 15 years down the road.
Oh, good question. I love this part. This is what I really get excited about. All these things that, will kind of keep you up at night, whether it's a sweeping tariff policy tweet in the middle of the night, or it's, a trade embargo or, significant shipping change, all these things. Change is good. Change is always good for business if you're on top of that change. If you've got a team that's jumping on that, you just no matter what the tariff policy, if you're responding faster than your peers on a long enough timeline, you're going to capture market share. You're going to beat the competition. It's a winning strategy over a long enough timeline. Change is good if you can lean into that. So those are always exciting. And I think that the opportunity to move quickly with the right strategic partnership is, been throughout our conversation, plays right into that. So business is good for that. As long as customers continue to need our products and services, we're going to be able to meet that faster than anyone else if we get this right. So, yeah.
Let me ask you, as a supply chain leader with the team, you might move into an organization, and I'm sure you have. I mean, you've been doing this for roughly, 20 years. Not every organization is maybe conditioned to be snappy, to be ready to respond quickly. In fact, I would say when I moved into Tesla, the speed of Tesla is unlike any other organization I've ever worked for, and will probably be unlike any organization I've ever will work for again. And therefore, it's probably pretty fair to say most organizations are just not conditioned to respond super fast. How do you come into an organization and prepare them to be able to respond quickly as a supply chain leader?
Yeah, that's a good question. I love it that we like to focus in on the tools. There's this new tool. If I buy this new software, it's going to help me respond faster, and that's true. There's aspects of that, and then there's the process behind using the tool and getting everyone trained on how to do something and how we're going to streamline our process. Process is a big thing too. It's probably more important than the tool itself. But even more important than those things is culture. And it's really about changing culture. And that gets back to building high performance teams is, motivating people to be extremely mission focused and really lean into, changing the culture, changing the DNA, finding ways, always challenging themselves. Surrounding yourself with people that will challenge you. I love being challenged by people that just blow me away. That's what's exciting, and high competitiveness within the internal teams to always continue to evolve. Those are really exciting things. You and I both worked at companies that really foster this, and when you get that right, I think the second to that, the culture is the number one. The second, which it takes time to change. Mm-hmm. You can do it rapidly. It's difficult, but that's the focus. The number two is the process. Number three is the tool. But if you look, most of the companies you and I have been probably a part of in our career, we like to focus on the tool first, mm-hmm. But it's probably the least leveraging item within the three.
Yeah, I would agree. That's a great unpack. Well, thank you, Brandon, for taking time out of your schedule to go through this topic of strategic partnerships. I think it was pretty informative. It was a great conversation. I love hearing how 20 years of experience has really brought you some insights here. This concludes our Executive Exchange podcast, and we're going to sign off. So again, thank you very much for your time. And for those that are listening, if you like the content, we'd really encourage you to subscribe for more.